Good afternoon to all distinguished guests, and greetings Minister Lee and President Xiao. And on behalf of Living Arts International, it is my honor to welcome you to Revealing Context, a meeting point on arts and social action in Asia. This meeting point symbolizes connectivity and shared aspirations of our combined efforts across Asia and highlights the influential role of arts and culture in bridging divides and moving Asia to the future. Strategic alignment between the visions of LAI and MOC Taiwan made it possible for us to establish a Living Arts International Branch Office in Taiwan 3 years ago and initiated Mekong Cultural Hub.
Today, 3 years later, we are delighted to see how this initial partnership has facilitated the development of a multi-layer network of connection and partnership within Taiwan and extending throughout Southeast Asia and Greater Asia. Thank you all for coming, and we wish you a successful meeting.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests and participants, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for participating in the 2021 meeting point, Revealing Contexts, Art and Social Action in Asia. As a new policy-oriented think tank, Taiwan-Asia Exchange Foundation has an aim to facilitate people-to-people connection in South and Southeast Asia, as well as New Zealand and Australia, under the framework of Taiwan's New Southbound policy since 2016. In fostering cultural exchange with our neighboring countries, we at the Foundation are proud to have Mekong Cultural Hub as one of our co-partners. Together, we have organized a series of workshops and symposiums on performing art in Asia in 2020. We will publish them as a collection of essays later this year. In addition, we conducted a study on how Southeast Asian art and cultural organizations had coped with the global pandemic in the year of 2020, last year. This year, Taiwan-Asia Exchange Foundation is delighted to collaborate with Mekong Cultural Hub again to build an international roundtable dialogue on the future of art and social action in post-pandemic era in Asia. In a time when cultural exchange has still been restricted by this new ordered world, we hope the ensuing dialogues could reveal how such limitations could be rethought, reworked, and even reinvented through art and cultural practices, and how a different future could be envisioned throughout our collective efforts. I wish you a fruitful discussion in today's dialogue and activities in the following 2 days. Thank you very much, and once again, welcome.
Hi everyone, I'm Frances. I'm based in London.
大家好, I'm Jennifer, based in Taipei, Taiwan.
My name is Rina. I'm from Phnom Penh, Cambodia.
Chào mọi người, my name is Quyên. I'm based in Hanoi, Vietnam.
So welcome everyone to Revealing Context, a meeting point on art and social action in Asia. Our Mekong Cultural Hub team is so pleased that you're here to join us. This meeting point is the last step in a process that's been going on for more than 9 months to develop the program. So when you look through all the different talks and workshops and creative activities that are happening, please know that everybody that you see has been thinking and working and talking and creating everything that they're going to share with you over months, and many small conversations and new connections and new collaborations. We're really excited to experience the content that everyone's going to share, and we're delighted to have so many participants from different places, different backgrounds coming together to talk about things that really we all care about doing our work in art and social action in Asia. And I said at the beginning, this is the end step of that process, but we also hope it's going to be the first step of a new process by everyone coming in to join this meeting point, and maybe we'll go forward in different ways that we don't expect. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope you really enjoy the programme.
Is share with you. Let's look at the program for the 3 days. There are more than 40 speakers, curators, and other contributors. They are from 13 countries. We are working with more than 10 partnering organizations to work out the meeting point. And we have a virtual program of curated conferences. We have interactive workshops, collective action, local gatherings, and programs by some close partners. 5 of them have brought in their event to celebrate the meeting point with us.
But thank you to everyone who's speaking or sharing during the meeting point, and thank you to all of the people who have been advising, curating, guiding us, guiding the speakers, guiding the artists during the months of preparation that we told you about before. We would also like to say a really big thank you to all of the partners involved in the programme, especially our co-organiser AAM, and our supporters, Japan Foundation Asia Centre, Ministry of Culture, Taiwan-Asia Exchange Foundation, and Mellon Foundation. Thank you.
So everyone, our team is here for you. So if you have anything you need during the meeting point, please feel free to contact me at serena@mekongculturehub.org.
And we will sharing news and updates on our social media throughout 3 days. Please follow us everywhere at Mekong Hub on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.
Please enjoy the meeting point.
Cảm ơn mọi người. Tạm biệt.
ขอบคุณจุ๊บเรีย
谢谢，拜拜。
Thank you. Bye bye.
Good afternoon. My name is Lawrence Zichao Yang. Lawrence Yang. I teach film and media and culture study at National Yangming Jiao Tong University in Taiwan. And it is my great pleasure to be the moderator of today's opening roundtable titled The Future of Art and Social Action in Post-Pandemic Asia. Kusuma Wijaya, an architect and urban studies scholar, community organizer based in Jakarta, Indonesia. And the second speaker will be Katrina Santiago, a cultural critic and writer from the Philippines, based in Manila, the Philippines. And followed by our third speaker, Nabuo Takamori, independent curator based in Taiwan. And finally, we have film director Rina Zhou, who works between Taiwan and the Philippines. And each of them will share their insights and the reflections in response to the theme today. And let's also welcome them. Okay, so back to the theme of the roundtable today. This topic is particularly, I think, meaningful and timely for many of us who work with text, words, images, sound, and environmental designs, whether as artistic practice, social engagement, or intellectual pursuit.
艺术的做法或者是社会的参与都很重要。在过去的1年半里面，我们都非常的清楚，目前的疫情已经让所有的事情都变得非常的困难，尤其是对于我们的艺术家或者是这些学者来说，我们过去呢是要常常的去各地旅行，然后去分享我们的想法，去做交流，然后会到不同的社区或者是地点来做这些事情。可是，就算在疫情之前，我想，艺术家、还有艺评家、策展人等等，他们都已经在面对各式各样的挑战，像是这个政治上面的一些监控啊，或者是经济上面的影响。那这些呢，很多都是根植于性别、宗教、种族等等的艺术，而这个状况呢，有可能会变得更加的复杂，因为我们的这个交流有时候会被中断，而且也会变得更碎片化，然后是在各个不同的社会里面在发生。可是，在这样子的背景之下，我们看到大家的资源的切割，还有这个 边界的关闭。可是我们看到大家有各式各样的想象，还有更多的
people across the regions begins to see more core issues in common. These issues could be rooted in Asia's or Southeast Asia's shared geopolitical
有
history.
东南亚，我们有共同的这个殖民后，还有冷战，还有全球资本主义的这样子的背景跟这样共同的过去。那
of pandemic and politics in Asia society these days, where new forms of connection and alliances take shape virtually and physically. A case in point would be the youth movement connecting Myanmar, Thailand, Hong Kong, and Taiwan under recent political and military suppressions, which have also witnessed an outburst and mobilization of media forms online or on the streets. This points toward new forms of communication and new forms of solidarity the previous generation has never seen. Also, while in the past, we see artists and cultural workers traveling for funding opportunities, we now see more and more artists looking for bonding opportunities through local or virtual.
艺术家是希望能够透过地方或者是虚拟的这样子的连接去建立更多的。
Have also come as a result of a much sharper awareness and anxiety about the common fate and future faced by the Southeast Asian people in its contemporary geopolitical control and pandemic confinement. While both politics and pandemic force people into isolation, we see more and more virtually connected joint efforts in imagining potential socially engaged art form in a variety of points of convergence or collaboration in terms of social, cultural, and political issues. And these issue also becomes the site of engagement and artistic intervention. So some of the question I think will linger through will be brought about by or evoked by our panelists in the following.
接下来的讲者4位语坛人呢
Following 2 days conference will be the follows. First, how do artists, activists, or critics navigate through the precarious reality in their local communities and environment with what kind of artistic or social strategies? And second, how do these people, how do artists, activists, critics forge new kinds of networking and connecting pattern across different geographical and geopolitical sites with new meeting points? And how do these new meeting points of collaboration or conversation help us envision a post-pandemic future that is more sustainable? And as we know now that pretty much most part of the Asia is not yet post-pandemic. I think we are still in the pandemic. And how do artistic collaboration and new meeting point help us anticipate and prepare for a future that is stronger and more sustainable? And the last question we might ask is, there is always a difference in the boundary between artistic activity and social activity. So when do artists become the agent for social change? And when do social action itself become a form of art? And when did one end and when does the other begin? What might be the potential power, the limit, and potential danger in practicing or engaging in socially engaged or socially aware art? So in the following presentations by our 4 speakers, I think each of our speaker will have 15 minutes. I will gently remind the speaker when your 15 minutes is used up, and please wrap up your presentation when you see me doing this, or I'll tell you virtually too. There will be a 20-minute break with video and performance before we have our Q&A section at 3:30. So please come back to the meeting room at 3:30. As we have many participants in the Zoom now, so for the sake of better time control, please type in your question in the chat box. So our presenter or myself will respond to the question on the first type, first serve basis. We would open the floor to other questions if we still have time before 4:20 p.m. Taiwan time. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Marco. Marco is an architect, an urbanist, an architectural designer in practice. He got involved into art because of his writing on cities and arts. In 2006, Marco was elected chair of Jakarta Arts Council where he served until 2010. He was a fellow at the MAC Center of Arts and Architecture in Los Angeles in 2008, and a fellow at the International House of Japan in 2009. In 2010, Marco co-founded and directed Rujak Center of Urban Study, or RCUS in short, which involves arts in investigating urban issues and developing urbanism. So let's welcome our first presenter, Marco.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Lawrence, for the very provoking introduction. I hope you can now hear me clearly and also see the screen that I share. So what I want to talk about is not complicated. I think I would just share some notes on some thoughts and some practices by Rujak Center for Urban Studies. My point is that we need still to focus on the present rather than, going into the haste of imagining the future. And of course, our problem is the challenges that are posed by these pandemics. I like the idea of talking about revealing context because I think within the situation of pandemics, revealing context has new meaning because at the same time we are connected to a lot of things while being in the same place all the time. So connecting or revealing context can mean very differently. You can reveal your context simultaneously to a lot of people, while at the same time, you can also see a lot of context from just your standing point. But I think art and social actions need to work together, not yet to imagine the future, but to kind of create the precondition and prerequisites for the imagination to be more collective and to be more complete, if possible. I use the word solidarity practice rather than social actions, which I would say mean almost the same thing, but in the sense that different emphasis. With solidarity practice, there is this sort of emphasis on the voluntary works together with others based on the feeling of solidarity, which are mutual. Of course, now we are very anxious, actually. We are anxious about how we interact, and we are anxious about how we travel. But I think at the same time, we have to question why exactly the haste for imagining the future. Because currently there are a lot of talks about imagining the future. Only yesterday, actually, I was engaged in a conversation about imagining the urban future. As Lawrence said earlier, it's obviously we are not post-pandemic, yes, yet. We are still in pandemics, and we do not yet have any idea about when it ends. So there are still a lot of uncertainty about it. But I think the haste to imagine the future has to do with a certain psychology of modernity, because the future is increasingly becoming a resource that people want to claim as early as possible. And this is, for me, a basic problem in solidarity, because we know, for the majority of our southern urban population, it is even yet impossible to imagine the future. They have to cope with the pandemic in much pain and difficulties now still. So we need social action and solidarity at the same time to help people to cope with the pandemics, but at the same time to prepare them to be enabled to have power to articulate their ideas about the future, post-pandemic futures, if you like. So there I see the core of the role that arts can play, which is through social practices, through solidarity practices with their art, with their trade, the art, to both help people to cope, but at the same time to enable them to imagine the future. These are just, pictures to illustrate how the things are not done yet, right? In Singapore, they started lockdown since last Sunday, and people started with this funny slogan, "Come down, not come down. No need to chiong to your nearest supermarket." I think chiong means really to storm in panic. And you see in India, because of religious reason, people flocked to the Ganges River, but not only for religious reason. In Indonesia, in Jakarta, for holiday, because people feel so distressed for being at home so long. And then you have this uncertainty of data globally. If you just follow the economists' publication from day to day or even week to week, they kind of swing from optimism to pessimism in the tones of their publications, be it data or opinions. For example, in economic terms, economists are so busy projecting when we will recoup the growth rates, which is very high according to their projection. That is in April. And then suddenly the same economist magazine says, oh, what happened in the past might not happen again. What rebounds after the world wars and before might not happen now, because rebounds has depend to many factors. And of course, there are people who would like to see the future as very bright, but then there is evidence that long COVID is coming. Long COVID in two senses. First is that in London, I think they found that when COVID got into you, it will stay longer. And the second meaning of the long COVID is that the wave will come back and back again. And I think in France now they have the third wave, and Singapore you have the second wave. Indonesia has not even gone through the first wave because it's still going up and up. So between optimism and pessimism. So I think exactly because that the facts are still being gathered, the data are still being.
我们还在收集数据，还需要分析数据，所以还有很多的不确定因素在，所以我们必须先暂停这种对未来。
Works now, but what I mean the works now is not to completely forget about the possible post-pandemic futures, but it is to still gather the information, gather the data for the future imagination. But in doing that, one way to do it is to work together with communities, help them coping the problem, while at the same time kind of listening to them, very on-ground information and data, and at the same time enable them to think about their rights about the future. The future is not the resource for certain people only, but the future is a resource for everybody. If you don't imagine your future, someone else will imagine it for you. And that could be something very imperialistic, very colonialistic, in the way that Lawrence described before about our, kind of colonial, etc., legacy, which are still there. This is an example of the work that we did with Rujak Center for Urban Studies in Jakarta as an example of a solidarity practice. We found out, being urbanists, we studied Jakarta, we found out that in the northern Jakarta, a lot of people actually do not have access to piped water. So when the government asked them to wash hands so often, they said it's impossible for us because we have to buy water and we are poor. Buying water, not getting it from piped water, costs 2 to 3 times more than when you get the piped water in your home. So we worked toward this, and we persuaded the government and the water company to provide free access to water. And it is emergency. The water have to be filled in by tanks every few days, but it helped. And from that, we learned a lot more about the data, about the situation in the localities. And I think this is an important element for the future. How can you ask people to be more prepared for future pandemics if they do not have access to water, they do not have access to home? How can you ask people to stay home if in every home you have like 5, 6 people in 10 square meters of space? So you have this equity of housing revealed most blatantly during the pandemic. And another thing we did was to engage communities and activists, including artists in different cities. And then we published this report. It's called Families in Time of Pandemics. It focused on families that lost jobs, families that look at this mother who have to sell food on the street, etc. This is also a result of, I think, very productive result of solidarity and practice that works at the same time to produce knowledge together. That's what I mean by co-production of knowledge. Another thing is we did organize a school for urbanists. Our school of urbanists is really for layperson, for young people, for students. So in a way, it is a participatory process to think about the cities. There are lectures by professionals, by scholars, but at the same time, also actually we encourage the participants to produce also their own perception, their knowledge about their own localities. And we produce it in also a book, another kind of solidarity and practice. I think this is a very nice word from our friend Ong Keng San from Theater Works, who said that possible futures are already happening close to home within the global South. It may involve knowledge which has been forgotten, left behind, or even repressed. I think Ong is referring to the fact that there are a lot of knowledge and also problems, issues that have not been properly solved. Inequity in housing, inequity in water access that I mentioned before, and inequity in voicing, in imagining the future that have been kind of monopolized by certain power or certain people. So in a way, the past is an important context when we think about the future. And I think also our colleague Abdul Malik Simon, one of advisor of Rujak, who said that, yes, we need to kind of suspend our discourse on monumental terms, on imagining the future. We still need to collect a lot of information. And I see the words of art and artists are important in that. And that can be kind of conducted most productively if you combine artistic practices with solidarity practices. Another thing that we are doing, kind of last picture here, is another works with another cities globally, especially from Latin America, and I think also from the Philippines, through conversations. Because we have some conversation with cities within Indonesia that we need to share. And I think the other colleagues that are invited to this conversation next week have also done a lot of solidarity works within their national boundaries or even globally. Another thing, this is really done by some friend artists who have kind of ventured out into the coast of Jakarta before COVID and also during COVID, actually. They travel along the coast because most poor communities occupy the coastal areas in many cities in Indonesia, in Jakarta, and also in Semarang. Now, because during the pandemics, we cannot go out more often, we I think, fortunately found out that there are other people in other cities doing the same thing. You know, the coast of Mumbai, the eastern coast of Mumbai, is also basically occupied by most of the poor communities in the city. So despite the fact that we are bound to our chair, to our office, to our homes, we get easily connected to people around the world. And I think this is what we also can do. Suspend the imagination, connect to more people with the same concern, converse more with each other through this wonderful technology. I think this should be useful for the future, at the same time also useful now to collect more information while also to do more solidarities. I think that would end my presentation. The rest are too detailed, but basically, you know, thank you very much. And this picture is not an artwork. It is actually a plastic recycling preparation. All I want to say to close is that the normal before the pandemic is among the causes of the pandemics. So we cannot go back or repeat, but then where to go? That requires solidarity and requires collective imagination so that the future will not belong only to a very few select people. Thank you very much.
Thank you for Marco. This is wonderful, fantastic case study. And as you mentioned, a lot of the hidden context needs to be revealed, but in the local form of knowledge production and also through artistic participation intervention, these hidden form of knowledge production could be seen, could be used to generate future possibilities. And thank you. And quickly, we are moving to our second speaker, Katrina. Our next speaker will be Katrina Santiago. She is an independent culture critic and opinion writer based in Manila, the Philippines, with a decade of work in print and online. She has written critical works on theater, film, visual arts, and popular culture. Her role as a critic has fueled her activism, which cuts across issues of cultural labor, systematic dysfunctions, and institutional crisis. She is contributing writer for CNN Philippines and is a teacher of multimedia art at the College of San Benito School of Design and Arts. She is also the founder of PAGASA, People for Accountable Governance and Sustainable Action, which seeks to build a new civil society network for the urgencies of the present. Let's welcome Katrina. You have the floor.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me well? We're good? Okay. So I prepared a very quick presentation, actually, and I'm very glad that Sir Marco came before me because I actually say a lot of very similar things to what he said, even when we didn't talk about it. I entitled this presentation Virtual Present and Real Futures, Empowering Solidarities in Post-Pandemic Asia. And the image that you're seeing on your screen is actually a mural that was in the Hong Kong Art Basel in 2019, long before it became more difficult to be an artist in Hong Kong. And I felt that it was important to start with that just because I do speak from a place of hope. The organization that I built in the past year, Pag-asa, is actually the Tagalog word for hope. And I think that for many of us in Asia, this is something that we have held on to at the worst times that we have been in the past year. But I also want to contextualize this in the kind of virtual present that we are in. It's been a very strange time for critics like myself because the past year has really been filled with conversations that I don't think I would have had with artists, critics, cultural workers, academics across Asia. And this started last year, and this is a
不管说
fraction.
是做译文的评论，或者是文化的评论，
I feel like this virtual present has really allowed us to talk about where we are instead of being uprooted from where we are to go to a conference. We are actually speaking from this place of comfort, anxiety, discomfort, sometimes real violence. And we are allowed to actually forge very intimate solidarities with each other. And I think this is something that we do want to acknowledge when we talk about the future as well, because where do we move from this virtual present, and what kind of future are we also looking at in relation to continuing these solidarities? One of the things also, other than the conversations, is of course we now have access to the work of many artists across the region. The performance arts meeting in Yokohama was the last trip that I made before the lockdown last year, and this year they went. Many of the performances were online, and they invited me again as a critic to watch the plays. And the same for the Singapore International Festival for the Arts, which is ongoing, and which Arts Equator has invited me as someone who is part of their Asian Arts Media Roundtable this year. So I feel that on the one hand, you have old connections that are just going online, but also you have new ones, which is what the Mekong Cultural Hub is to me. And I feel like we want to acknowledge the kind of virtual connections that we have been able to make, because these are important in the kind of future that we want to fashion. I think that in these conversations, one of the things that became clear was how our solidarities in terms of being artists, writers, cultural workers, theater workers, etc., is the realization that we are all precarious, that we are unprotected by our governments, that very few of us were actually considered as essential workers. And I think this is important because our performance venues, our galleries, our museums were the first to close down. And in the Philippines, it's going to be the last to open up. So the cultural worker continues to live in precarity, which makes it very difficult to think of a future because you want to survive in the present. The other thing that we surfaced are really national solidarities, the very clear sense of how across Asia, the kinds of governments and leaders that we have been faced with have been predisposed to incompetence and neglect in the time of pandemic, but also in the face of massive criticism and dissent, that many of them are also predisposed towards violence. Some more than others, but I think all of us across Asia have experienced a version of violence given lockdowns, given the lack of proper assistance, given the breakdown of public health care. So I think that the climates of fear that we are all experiencing is also an important component in deciding what kinds of future we're actually looking at as a region. So what has the artist been doing in the face of his own precarity as an artist who has no earnings, and also as a citizen in the face of a government that is incompetent and neglectful and sometimes violent? In the Philippines, and I think this applies to many in Asia, there was the instinct of survival. And it wasn't just to survive as artists, but also to make sure that you could address the needs of those who are more neglected or more vulnerable. Here it became clear that there were artists, that there was a hierarchy in the cultural system, that there were artists who had savings, that there were artists who could continue earning money in the time of pandemic, and that they could be the ones to assist those who were lower in the pyramid or in the totem pole of cultural work. There was also criticism. I think there was a very clear sense of how neglectful government was, and therefore many artists and cultural workers did work on addressing the gaps in government response. And I think this is important in terms of actually being critical, but also assisting sectors beyond the cultural and beyond the artist. And of course, there was the artistic response of resistance. These are some of very few of the works that were done by the usual suspects in the Philippines. These would be the leftist organizations. And so, of course, they're the ones who always have the energy, capacity, and resources to actually build upon acts of resistance very quickly and very efficiently. But I think one of the more interesting responses that have to do with resistance are individual artists rising to the occasion of nation. This is a few of the works of Leroy New that he posted on his Instagram account, and it actually is a critique of the insistence of government that people were not people weren't wearing that they can't see the whole screen. Okay, we're good. So Leroy started playing around with the idea of masks and what it means to mask up the citizenry. And so he started a series of different types of masks and putting the slogans that he believed were important at any given time. The other artist who was doing work like this one on his Instagram account early into the pandemic was Mark Salvatos. He's an installation and street artist. And he just started playing around with a black screen and white text, choosing what he was actually reacting to the president's weekly addresses to nation, where he, if you know of our president, then it's really about confusing us with his rhetoric, confusing us with his speeches. So this is something that he continued to do early, I think the first 6 months of the pandemic. And this is the work that I've done as a writer in Pag-asa. I think now that every time people ask me, what have you written in the past year? And I always think, what have I written? And I realize that this is what I've written. It might not be a full essay, it might not be a book, but it is the work that we have done in solidarity with communities that were neglected by government. So Pag-asa really started as a movement that was premised on critique. And that criticism brought us to addressing first the urgent needs of communities that were in dire need. And this is something that we continue to do. And we leveled this up to solidarity projects, such as ensuring that farmers can continue to have the funds to plant and replant every season. We have a community of dream weavers in southern Philippines that we also constantly work with towards getting back on their feet in the face of the pandemic. But also we shifted very quickly, and we wanted to be very clear about the fact that while we were assisting communities in need and standing in solidarity with them, that we were doing this as a form of criticism against government. That the work we were doing was not charity, it was solidarity because we believe in these acts of addressing urgent needs towards actual resistance and towards building a sense of what it is we have in common with the most vulnerable communities. And what we do have in common is a government that is neglectful and incompetent, even when maybe some of us are not as affected by what it is they do or what it is they actually fail to do. And then we also addressed national issues of democracy, and also forged solidarities with other countries. And the first one was Myanmar. So we started talking about the state of democracy and freedom, not just in the Philippines, but also elsewhere in the region. So the twofold challenge to the artist, I feel, is how to survive so that we might continue to critique and resist. I think this is an important question because you also realize that when the artist can barely survive because he or she doesn't know where her next meal is going to come from, the one who benefits from that kind of hunger is really government, because we also realize that if we're hungry and if we're tired and if we don't have money to pay the rent, then there is no way for us to have the energy for criticism and resistance. So I think this twofold challenge is actually something that we can address by truth-telling and clarity. If there's anything that I realized in conversations with other Asian artists, activists, academics, many of them with Sir Marco actually, it's the fact that the more we live in this present time and the more we have these conversations, the more we realize how we live in times of crisis. And the crisis is tied to the privilege and the hierarchy in the cultural system. And I think the pandemic has proven that it is broken because it fails to protect the most important component of art making and creativity, which is the cultural worker and artist. But also we are more clear about the truths in relation to the national crises that we face. And this includes everything from our relationship with foreign powers to our relationship with our leaders and the kinds of leaders we are electing. I think it's very clear now that there are very deliberate, calculated moves to clamp down on artistic freedom. Whatever version of censorship we are facing, it is censorship and it is a form of silencing. And I think that it would be terrible for us to allow for it to just go back to where we were before the pandemic. Now that now that things are clear to us about the national and the cultural crisis that we face, I think that it's important that we move forward from there instead of just going back to the old normal or building a new normal where everything is exactly like it was pre-pandemic. So I think that the answer really is that we work from the solidarities we've already created in this virtual present towards a future where we are collectively empowered to survive, critique, and resist. How do we do this? I echo Sir Marco when he says that solidarity is fantastic work and we need to start doing it with our communities. And it's not just the community of artists and cultural workers that we have found solidarity with in the present, but also with the more vulnerable in our societies, but also with everybody else in the region. I think that the Southeast Asian and the Asian Solidarity Network is one that's just waiting to be tapped. And I think that this is a community that we can totally build already over 1 year since this pandemic hit. And I think that as a writer, this is really something that I wish I had the funding for, is to tell our own stories. And I think that it's a very important part of what nature will look like. If we can actually put into words, if we can actually build something concrete that we can go back to in relation to these historic times and the ways in which we have survived, critiqued, and resisted. And I think that if we don't write these stories for ourselves, someone else will. And then it will be a future that is not ours. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, there's forging stronger solidarities. I think the time is ripe for it. I think that we are now realizing more and more how much we have in common. And even when we don't really, even when there are specific aspects of the violence, oppression, silencing that we face in our contexts, I think that the translocal stories actually come together in terms of a very common frame of experience that is regional. And this is something that we have yet to harness, but I think I continue to be hopeful about in terms of harnessing. And this is the last two slides. I think we want to also make it clear to ourselves that the climate of fear that we see in the present is also in our future. And there is no way for that to change unless we actually grapple with it, accept it, write it down, document it well, so that we know how to handle it as we forge forward in post-pandemic Asia. We are poised to climate as as the farmers in India have shown us, as Hong Kong is still showing us, as Taiwan is showing us. I think there are many great movements across Asia that we need to be standing in solidarity with, but also documenting for our own plotting of our own futures. And that is really what I continue to be hopeful about. I think that's it.
Hi. Hi, thank you for Katrina for this really encouraging and really inspiring. And I'm really touched myself about this call because the very capacity to go beyond the climate of fear is pretty much also hinged upon the very concrete specific ability to consolidate resources at hand to strategize the kind of resources we have. And that requires a lot of wisdom and politics on the ground rather than as well as in the air. So thank you, that's really encouraging. So let's welcome our next speaker, and Nobuo Takamori. Nobuo is an independent curator based in Taiwan. He is a director of Outsider Factory, a curators collective. He selected important exhibition and curatorial works include Post-Attitude in Mexico, 2011, South Country, South of Country, 2012, Ho Chi Minh City in Taiwan, and to The Lost Garden, 2014, Elite Gallery, Taipei, and Taiwan International Video Art Exhibition, etc. He's in charge of many important exhibitions, curatorial work that connects Taiwan and different parts of the global South in the past couple of years. Let's welcome Nobuo. You have the floor, Nobuo. Thank you.
Yes, I'm already online. Okay, so thanks introduction from Lawrence, and it's also my pleasure to be here. And thanks for the audience in front of the monitors from different parts of the world. My name is Nobuo Takamori. I'm independent curator based at Taipei, Taiwan. Today's my title of presentation is the curatorial practice assessment during pandemic. I will share some brief thoughts of my experiences during pandemic to rethink how could curatorial activities and artistic practice assessment change during and after pandemic. But I also want to notice most of my experience is from locally from Taiwan, and as some audience may know, the experience in Taiwan is quite different compared to other Asian countries. Okay, so let's move to another slide. Okay, so we all noticed, of course, the pandemic of COVID-19 changed our daily life and the international cultural landscape forever. As we all know, one of the main purposes of art curators' missions is exhibition production. However, exhibition is a kind of interface that's related to physical contact. And the installing of exhibitions relies on physical manpowers, and the representation of an exhibition also needs the physical participation of audiences. Besides that, as the pre-pandemic work was a globalized world, which means the art scenes before the pandemic was highly related or relied on international cooperation. From curating, installing to audience visiting, the international participations of the exhibitions already became our daily normal condition. But the situation of COVID-19 pandemic since the beginning of the last years shut down the normals which we used to be. Okay, so here are the initial challenges the curators and exhibition professionals will face during the situations of so-called new normal. For the practice assessment of curatorial works, here are what realistic challenges we face. The first is the shippings. The shipping during the pandemic period were unstable according to the international situations, and the price even higher than usual, sometimes twice or more. And the second is the traveling. The international project was highly reliant on international travels. Not only the curators could travel for their field research, but for artists could travel for installing the works by themselves. A lot of communities or artists in residency-based projects also highly relied on international travels, which became highly difficult after the pandemic of COVID-19. Not only the price of flight ticket became more expensive, but also the travel restrictions, usually sudden shiftings according to the change of the situations. So which means the curating plans becomes more difficult to set out. And the third part is installings. Installings was usually one of the core parts of the exhibitions productions. However, under the situation of pandemic, we need to adapt the new work fans to install remotely, which make the things become more complicated. And the end for the managing of the exhibitions, it's also kind of challenging. Includes we need to control the number of visitors and reduce the interactions. For example, earphones was highly adapted before the pandemic for broadcast sound, but after the pandemic, we need to rethink about the dangers of transmission between the audiences. Okay, so during the pandemic period, because of the restrictions of the travel, as curator and art critics, became difficult to traveling freely across the borders. Most art activities remain noticed regionally and isolated from international art scenes, especially for the cities like Taipei, which is not the international main hub of the art journalist and art market. We lack more opportunities to allow the international scenes to attend the local activities. However, the pandemic does not only bring us the negative effects, but also some positive effects, because the restriction of the travel and the safety environment in Taiwan before last week, because since last week we have some real serious problems. And the people and the fundings remain in the borders. And as I note for like in Taiwan, Vietnam, and Korea, and some Asian countries who have better reaction for the pandemic, they have a lot of overseas citizens and students return to their homelands. And this effect indeed brings some good effect for the local artistic development. For example, the Art Taipei, a local art fair in 2020, got its business success because the most powerful local curators, they can't travel to another major art fair overseas. And the admission of graduate schools of Taipei National University of Arts at this year became more competitional than ever, because some talented students who were able to study overseas, they decide to stay at home during the pandemic period. And for my personal project, because I started in charge Asian Art Biennial 2021, which organized by National Taiwan Museum of Fine Arts. And the biennial planned to open at the end of October. And regarding to the situation of pandemic, I realized I need to do something structurally different to respond to the reality, but which could still keep the spirit of cross-Asia collaboration. So therefore, instead of curating individually, I decided to organize curatorial teams which includes me and Ho Yu-Kwan from Taiwan, and Tessa Maria Quazon from the Philippines, and Tanavi Chopradit from Thailand, and Anushka Rajendran from India. The multiple curatorial system allows us to work in a multiple decision systems. So this is the working frames we created for these curatorial teams. Before the pandemic, this kind of international co-curatorship will always ask curator to visit.
我们也都会请国际策展团队呢到现场。
Of course, the pandemic make these methods impossible again. So therefore, instead of work on everything together, we divide the project into different parts, which allows the local curators to take care more on the physical installings of the exhibitions, and other foreign curators could focus on the project which could work remotely. So therefore, for example, we asked Tessa Maria Quazon to charge the archive program, and because the archive could be transported more easily. So after the biennial opened in Taiwan, the archive could also make the tour to the Philippines. And other two curators will focus on video art program and also the academic programs such as the publications or international symposium. And the 10th of Asian Art Biennial 2021 is also try to respond to the current situations. The main term, Phantasmapolis, it's a new created great term, which means the city of phantoms or the city of illusions. So in these editions of AA Beats, we are trying to represent the sci-fi culture of Asia and discuss the Asia futurism, and also try to research the context of sci-fi in Asia since the Cold War period to now. And of course, a lot of participated artists, they will focus or discuss the situation of pandemic or the imagination of post-pandemic. And besides my institutional response, I would like to take more time to share a case from my Vietnamese friend, curator Nguyen Huy, as an alternative perspective to reflect today's symposium. My friend Huy, he built a private house, which also could function as an artist village at the countryside of Đà Lạt. The architecture was built by a Vietnamese architect, and the location is far away from international cities like Ho Chi Minh City. And this place was worked privately without institutionalized. So my friend Huy, he hosts the artists for some short stay, just like kind of a homestay style during the pandemic period. So the artists who stayed here with the curator, they can just like stay in someone's homes. They can reading, chatting, dining together without regular requirements from the institutionalized standard. So this case make me feel his actions make me remind the 15th century's Italian Renaissance literature, which called Decameron. The story background of Decameron is the 15th century Florence under the pandemic, and some young people from the cities, they escape to the countrysides and stay in a private villa, and they sharing story to each other for spend the time during the lockdown. So when I interviewed with Huy to discuss about the Vietnamese art scenes during the pandemic, because the Vietnamese, the situation is more similar as Taiwan's, they have more successful prevent from the COVID-19 at the beginning. So he said to me, Vietnam doesn't change, doesn't get better. It's more like Vietnam still reminds before what was to be before the pandemic. And And it's because it's just because the world stops, so the world have time to start to see what's going on in Vietnam, because we don't have enough institutions, so we don't have the province of close the institution. How could we close the things we never opened? Okay. So with my friend, with Western conclusions on the pandemic issues, I also reach the conclusions of my presentation. So it's my last slide. The pandemic caused the regionalism and the isolations. So we should also think about the positive and negative effect of this situation. And I think it's part of the most important issues I personally quite serious concerns about is about how the physical and psychological isolations caused by the pandemic. And I also mentioned that during the pandemic periods, a lot of civil war and political conflict happens around the world, but without the international tensions. Okay. And the second is the pandemic also caused the self-confidence for some Asian countries, especially for the countries who has better response to the early pandemic, like Singapore, Korea, or Taiwan. But what self-confidence really means is also what we need to think about. And the third, the third is the major point I want to mention, because before the Asian cultural scenes was highly relied on the Euro-based events as the platform to interact with other Asian countries, such as Venice Biennials and Frankfurt Book Fair. And we all know in 2020, the last year, these important events has been postponed. But in this year's, in 2021, as they reopened again, this event became very Western centralized, because most visitors and accredited and professionals who could allow or who can travel freely to attend these events are usually European or Euro-based professionals who could more travel freely within the Europe continent. So therefore, I feel there is an urgent need for Asia to build similar semi-international or cross-Asia platforms after this pandemic.
15 minutes.
Okay. So the concept is break out the risk and allow the information from different Asian countries could still be interact to each other even during this kind of exchange situations such as pandemic situation. All right. So I think I not yet use all my time limitations, but it's the end of my presentation. So thanks for the host again, and also thanks for all the audience in front of the monitor.
Well, thank you, Nabo, for sharing this really specific and in detail the logistics involved in making our event possible during this pandemic-driven confinement. So there's always a possibility out of precarity. And let's quickly move to our last speaker, Rina Zhou. Rina Zhou is a Filipino-Taiwanese filmmaker. She studied filmmaking at the Motion Picture Department of National Taiwan University of Arts. Being of two lands, between the Philippines and Taiwan, she has applied her sensibility of two cultures to the issue raised in her films, which has circulated in international film festival, such as the Cannes Critics Week, Busan International Film Festival, and the acclaimed Golden Horse Awards in Taiwan. Based in Taipei, Rina is currently working on both fiction and documentary films, exploring possibility of different narratives. Rina, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rina. I guess Lawrence just did my introduction. I'm sorry I don't have impressive, elaborate slideshows as our previous speakers, because in the film industry, we didn't really experience the pandemic. And now we're in our, I think, the actual first week of facing it. I'm at a loss. I'm really at a loss. I think before sharing with you my intakes and what I feel we can or can't do, I want to show a clip of my previous work that I think has the essence of what I really want to do during these times of fear. So I will share a short clip, and if the clip has some delay or has some technical issues, please share with me at the chat comment area so that maybe I can stop it or pause it, or maybe you can show it later.
吃吧。这是什么啊？这好像是菲律宾的薯片。菲律宾哪里可以买得到啊？在教堂那儿有卖。你等我一下哦。你是菲律宾人吗？我妈妈是。那为什么你是从大陆来啊？我爸爸在那里工作。哦。佳佳还有婉玲的妈妈也是菲律宾人哦，你们认识吗？那你会讲菲律宾话？不会。你呢？你爸妈都是台湾人吗？我妈妈是客家人，我爸爸是外省人。外省人和客家人都是台湾人吗？嗯。你会讲客家话吗？一点点，学校有教。你还好港语。那你会讲外省话吗？没有外省话这种东西呀，只有国语、台语还有客家话。那台语怎么讲？假爸爸。那什么意思？你吃饱没？还有什么人是台湾人？还有原住民。我长得像原住民吗？有一点像呢。你会说原住民话吗？不会，只有原住民会讲原住民的话哦。我是台湾人吗？你爸爸是台湾人吗？是吧？那你是在台湾出生的哦？那你应该就是吧。你喜欢自然老师吗？我也不喜欢，他凶巴巴的，然后脸又长得很丑，很像妖怪的人。那你喜欢英文老师吗？英文老师。
Okay. Before starting the talk, can I ask everyone to open their cameras? Because I really want to see who I'm talking to, especially now that we can't go out. Yeah, I really miss this face-to-face, even though it's only just been a few days. Okay. Hi, everyone. The reason why I showed this clip
我之所以会放这段影片给大家看，是因为它不只是我
after spending some time in the Philippines studying. It is also a miniature of the reality in Taiwan right now, because as our previous speakers have discussed, solidarity. And solidarity is still a journey for us in Taiwan because of our history, because of our very new immigrant infusion in our population. So we are still on the road of imagining and sculpting who we are as Taiwanese. And because of that, we don't really know about Asia. Yeah, Asia is big. I remember meeting an Iranian theatrical performer, and we said to each other, "Hi, we're both Asians." And it was a remarkable experience because I couldn't imagine Asian being like that, and probably she couldn't imagine me as well. So in Taiwan, I think we are still in the beginning of opening this window of knowing Asia, of knowing ourselves at the same time. And now that we are just beginning our pandemic experience, we actually have spent a lot of time resisting other people from Asia. Every day at 2 p.m., we have a national conference from our health department of how many new confirmed COVID cases we have. And for the past 1.5 years, it has mostly been from outsiders, people coming from other countries. And a lot of those are from migrant workers from Southeast Asia. A lot of those are from the Philippines, my mother's hometown. And it has caused hostility, sadly. It has been difficult for us to advocate or to even try to share our Southeast Asian culture because of the hostility for the past 1.5 years of our COVID situation in Taiwan. We were safe, but we were so afraid of people bringing in the virus from the outside world. So we have such hostility and such stereotypes towards people outside of Taiwan. And the only thing mostly that people in Taiwan know or feel about Southeast Asians is that they are carrying the virus, which is, yeah, very sad. And now that we are experiencing it ourselves now, I am both afraid and hopeful that somehow this would open up some kind of empathy, because it's really hard for people to understand each other if they haven't gone through the same situation. And in this case of the pandemic, it's really hard for us in Taiwan to understand what it is like outside of Taiwan to live a life under the pandemic. But the positive thing is that in Taiwan right now, there are more and more artists in different fields, also in film, that are starting to advocate issues about social justice or cultures from Southeast Asia, but it's still within the cultural bubble. I don't know if that's clear. It means that our audience are basically people who already have interest in Southeast Asian culture or in social justice. So it's quite hard to reach out to people who didn't know or didn't care about other Asian cultures. And therefore, when you don't understand Asia except for yourself, it's really hard to open up the door to know people better or to have any empathy at all. And in Taiwan, we have a lot of public funding. And thanks to that, we were able to hold in the film industry, film festivals or workshops that try to interconnect with each other outside of Taiwan in the Asian region. But there's also a negative effect with that it's that it's not a mass entertainment medium. It's mostly about social issues. And another thing is that although we don't have a lot of censorship in Taiwan, we do have this kind of deafening effect. Because if you take public grants or public resources, sometimes you have to say good things about your country because it's a public grant. And sometimes you can't really talk about the problems you have in Taiwan when we are facing migrant workers or immigrant families. So I think now is a really good chance for us to learn about our Asian neighbors, because we are 1.5 years delayed in our situation and we have so much to learn. For example, this Zoom meeting, it wouldn't have happened because if not for our current situation, and we have had not very secure establishments or structures for this pandemic situation. And I do hope that since we are now in the same boat, we can learn from each other and we can have some kind of inclusion in our cultures, because maybe we can understand each other better now. So that we can develop the solidarity from within Taiwan and also reach out to those of you who don't know outside of Asia, inside of Asia. Another thing I have been struggling with is how to package the social issues and the problems that I want to convey in a more personal appearance, which means how can I reach out to people who don't really care, especially now that we are not really locked up, we're in our homes. And I think I have really learned a lot from the previous speakers, and I think perhaps I can also learn about how to work with the algorithm on the internet, because now that we rely so much on internet content, but we still struggle from the algorithm because we don't really see what we don't click on because of the algorithm. And I think that is something that I want to learn more about. And another thing is, I don't know if any of you experienced this, but I have experienced some kind of trauma when advocating for the issues that I want to, or the problems that I want to solve, is that sometimes you feel so helpless that it affects you personally as an artist. And I think that's also something that I want to reach out to. I want to discuss with you more, because we're just beginning in our situation. And I think this is really a good start for us to reach out now that we are starting our fear. I don't have a lot of experience handling the pandemic because I'm just an individual filmmaker. So I hope in the Q&A session, perhaps we can discuss more about possibilities, not just film, but also maybe merging different medias. And it's really difficult for me to speak only by myself because I haven't experienced this before. So yeah, maybe we'll talk more in the Q&A session later.
Thank you, Rina. I'm so glad that Rina asked everyone to appear in front of the screen, because it remind me of what Hannah Arendt mentioned, that there's always this possibility of the public space, of this foundation of empathy, of memory, of narrative, of action, is based on this space of what she called the space of co-appearances. And she probably wouldn't imagine that now during the pandemic, we rely on this very thin surface of screen to give each other emotional support, infrastructure of solidarity, and all sorts of connection that we need during this dire situation. And I think this is really good, proper ending of today's roundtable. Take a break, enjoy the video for the intermission, and type in your question. Thank you again for all 4 speakers today, and thank you all for participating in the roundtable. Thank you.
តូចញើយដល់ធំអើយទុកងុំក្នុងប្រាណទុកអត់នៅស្រាងស្រានទុកដល់
This is the time for our Q&A session after the really kind of sad but also very touching video of the Bangkok, the Cambodia Requiem. I'm sure many of you will be interested in viewing, and we can this video again. But first of all, I want to invite all the panelists to turn on your video for us, because now you guys are sort of in charge of the panel here. And for those of you who want to ask questions, please feel free later. Later after I go through the chat box question and comments first. So I guess I'll just read from some of the some of the comments and questions from the chat box first, and to open up sort of the open up. So there's, I think, Minjun to everyone. I think this is talking to Katrina. Well, quote, if we don't write our own story for the future, someone else will, and then it will not be our future. And I think this is also, this particular beautiful line is also mentioned by Marco's opening talk, that future, if we don't produce or document or represent for history's sake or future's sake, that future might be an imperial one if we don't. So this is a really topical line for our panel, and so this is a comment from Minjun. So I think the first question also is from Minjun to Rina, I believe. So the question goes, Rina, is it possible for you to give an example of your stress? Is it related to being isolated or other issues? Thank you for your very nice presentation. I think Rina, you can unmute yourself, and share a little bit more in response to that.
I've tried sharp, harsh documentaries that pinpoint the problems. I've tried sci-fi films that are also sharp to the problem, talking about how dangerous it is to work as a migrant worker, especially female caretaker here in Taiwan. But I come to realize that my audience are quite niche. Those are really people who mostly watch art films or care about social issues. And despite being touched to get feedback from them, it's also helpless because I couldn't really reach out to the mass. And in order to create real impact and change, I think I need to learn how to impact them, how to reach out to as many people as possible. So the stress was that, because it was more intuitive and easy for me to make an artistic art film or a very social justice kind of film. But it wasn't easy and intuitive for me to make an entertaining piece that gradually brainwashed people into believing what I believe in. And that's sort of my challenge and my issue since then. And then the pandemic hit, and my stress became multiple ones. One is still that, but others is also more personal related. I have family in the Philippines, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in the US, in a lot of places, because I've come from an immigrant family. And it was hard because I was in Taiwan, I was safe, I could go out, I could eat out, and I couldn't bear even staying on Facebook or posting anything that seems normal, because I get triggered just by comments from my friends and families that are still suffering in a pandemic condition, just saying, hey, it's nice to see that you're well. Oh my God, it doesn't feel nice to see you say that because I know you're not well. So I get this fear and this guilt of not being on the same boat as everyone in my family and friends. And that's a really huge stress, not just me, but almost every Southeast Asian immigrant family that I know in Taiwan. And it's hard for us to say to people, no, migrant workers that comes from those countries here in Taiwan doesn't come just to get medical assistance or support, because that is now the popular saying here in Taiwan, that why would we let those people come in our country and enjoy our medical resources? That's not true. That's because we need those labor resources. But so then it's harder to advocate for them, to fight for them, to fight for us. And that's another layer of trauma. And now that we are in the same boat, finally, and sadly, I think the stress comes with, okay, now that people are more stressed about the pandemic, how do I dig over that and find the empathetic heart of everybody and make an art that can really connect to that? And in order to connect to that, I have to fight over all the algorithms on the internet, because we have an explosive amount of content. What would make people want to click on this? And what would make people even have the chance to click on this because of how everything is set up? Yeah, so I think that is my layer and layers of trauma. And I am actually now in a better place because of realizing what my trauma is. And it was until now that I know that there is this kind of trauma. It's called, I don't know what it's called. It's the trauma for people who want to fight for something, although they're not in that specific place. I don't know if you can relate to this. And it's not just the pandemic, it's also political conflict, wars. And I often ask myself, why do I care? I mean, I'm here, I'm not in a war conflict area. I'm not back in the Philippines suffering like my peers. Why do I care? Why do I let everything like this affect me personally? But then I think again, and if even I don't care, who will care? So I try to adjust myself into a more productive state of mind. And I think that is now my challenge. And that is now my question for you who have been through it. How do you dig through all this shit and try to connect with people? Because one person is one person, but like thousands of people is a voice. And it's those voices that change legislative decisions. It is those people who it is that voice that can change international opinions. Yeah, I think that's my stress. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Rina. Before we go to the next question, anyone from the panelists want to respond to this line of discussion about making contact, about making touch, making network? Katrina, did you raise your hand?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
please.
I think very quickly, I totally understand. I think though that I think a primary source of anxiety is how guilty we feel when we're the ones who aren't in such a difficult position. And I've found that when I'm very clear about the privilege that I have, that it is actually what allows me to move forward in terms of what it is I can do for the ones who aren't as privileged. And when it comes from that position, I think that's also where the empathy comes from. And it also allows me to be more confident in terms of the material I can put out. And this is why I included the work that I've done with Pag-asa, because it's totally different from the writing that I do. I don't think I've written a review in 1 year. I haven't written a personal essay, and these are the works that I actually really do for a living. And I haven't done it. I can't say that I've been writing anything that was personal or that is part of the body of work that I usually do. I've done a lot of presentations for things like this one. I've done so much for Pag-asa in terms of writing the content. And I think that that was really the impulse in terms of wanting to reach out to a bigger audience that will not read a long essay, but will actually go on Instagram and will want to learn about issues that they might otherwise not care about. And then it was very clear, especially now that we're gearing up for the 2022 elections, that I now have to shift to other languages. Because the only way we can win 2022 is if I'm not just writing in English, but I'm writing in Tagalog as well. So I think that the how conscious we are of the limits of what we're doing and the possibilities for expanding, given our practice of solidarity, as Sir Marco said earlier, is really at the heart of trying to grapple with the anxieties and guilts that we feel. So maybe that's something that can help as well, not just Rina, but everyone else who's also grappling with that kind of crisis.
Thank you. Anyone else want to respond to this line of discussion? This is really inspiring because as we are sort of, as Rina pointed out, we are sort of trying to reach out, but also some of us are buried in this fight with the algorithm. And I think this is also the point of having the so-called curated conference that's really concentrated, really inviting people of the same heart, on the same page, of the same co-appearance, to talk to each other during this situation. And I think this is really, this is very different from other kinds of media platforms. And so there's a next question, if there's no one else responding to the previous one. I think Fadi to Katrina. Yes. The pandemic brings down the economy and people suffer. Do you find it challenging to cultivate the solidarity in your community? If yes, why? I think this is also not just to Katrina, but also for most of us in the room. But why don't you start, Katrina?
Absolutely. I think the physical, losing the ability to go out physically and engage with communities has been very difficult. But Pag-asa in particular has been very lucky to forge partnerships with activist organizations and other NGOs on the ground. So we're already working with people within communities. And this was something that we really started off with when we envisioned how it was we could help them and how we could know their stories and struggles better. We really went for communities that already had organizations that also wanted to do the work that we wanted to do, so that what it became was really a challenge of trusting each other, that whoever it was we were meeting virtually would actually do the work we agreed on the ground. And so far it's been fantastic. I mean, there has been no one on the ground that we met virtually who didn't do the work that they promised to do with us. And so it has also been a test in our ability to trust each other, which I think is also something that the pandemic has taught us.
Anyone else from the panel and also from the audience wants to raise a question about the possibility of consolidating and finding solidarity on the ground or virtually? Anyone? Okay. Okay, Marco? Yeah, please.
Yeah, at the same time, I think I also want to share the same fact of feeling a little bit of frustration in a way. Actually, I do have some works that have been delayed because it's very difficult to get in touch with communities that we used to work with. For example, we are cooking on an idea of making a community museum, actually, a museum of fiction and a museum of the struggle for housing rights in a location where there had been before an eviction and a new residential neighborhood is being rebuilt, but it get delayed. But then there are also other communities that we work with, and very difficult to get into them. For example, actually, I just heard a meeting has been cancelled for this afternoon after this meeting with a community that we are working on also another housing project. But again, I have to think also about the different connections that I am making more because of this pandemic, because I think it has to do also, for example, with the Mekong Cultural Hub that have connected us to a number of other colleagues, including Katrina. I didn't know Katrina before. Very grateful to know you and get in touch several times now through this Internet of Things. And also, there is a regular meetings through Zoom, of course, with some artists and other activist colleagues in Southeast Asia. So these different communities personally are connecting in different ways that I also must say I am grateful for. So I don't know. In my presentation, I said we really need to suspend some conclusion, but really kind of enjoy and mulling and talk about these different ways still. And I agree. I think was it Katrina or Rina who said that the more we converse, actually, the better. So don't be quiet. Don't stand still. Keep talking and see what happens. By the way, thank you, Rina, for your film.
Yeah, this is a very fruitful discussion, because I think what is pointed out here is not only the willingness to communicate or to reach out, but also it involves the very access. Who has the access? Who has set up this regular infrastructure for allow people to commune? So that's a really practical and logistical issues that also brought up by NABUO's coordination around different time zone, around different sections of the exhibition. So I think this is a very important dimension, the access to the use of infrastructure, and this regular meeting, regular reaching out as a habit, as a habitat of our communal growing. And so next question, well, not question, sorry. Hi from Thailand. One of the things that helped me, I think this is Padek Jitwaransan. Hi from Thailand. One of the things that helped me coping with the pandemic stress is growing houseplants. I think many people resonate here as of what I'm doing in my backyard with succulents. Okay, and Q&A session is very, okay. Sorry, I need to scroll down. So C to everyone, thank you to all speakers for your thought-provoking presentations. Appreciate NABUO's important point about increasing regional collaboration. To all or any of the panelists, what are some ways we can do this in person? Given that their COVID restrictions can be so different and evolve quickly, even across very close borders. I think this is a question to anyone in the Zoom, in the panel, on the roundtable. What are some ways we can do this in person? Given that there's a COVID restriction, these restrictions can be very different from place to place. Also, this situation evolved quickly. Anyone from the panelists want to respond to this question? Yeah, maybe NABUO, you wanna? Yeah.
Yes, I would like to respond, maybe not directly to these questions, but because before the pandemic, most of the public organizers for the art events are very focused on the event-based projects, which means they want the populations of the audience, they want the event could be like physically big and capacity could be greater for increasing the more public for participations the event. But I think during the pandemic period, it might be also a good chance that we can return to more traditional weight for the cultural sharing, which means the writing and publishing, because the writing and publishing, both digital reads or the physical read publishings could be not, it's kind of a media, in fact, will not be affected by the pandemic or the COVID-19 situations. So I think it's the beginning of the pandemic. It's more easy for me to ask the sponsorship for investigate on the writers to writing some critics or more serious research. But after certain times, when the online conference and online meeting becomes more popular, the organizers, they are starting to more crazy about making a lot of online events. So I think it's a little bit pity if we can use like these 2-year periods as kind of a basement to make more fundamental writing and researching projects, which will be quite helpful and important for the post-pandemic activities. Yeah, it's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Nabu. And other thoughts about this possibility or impossibility or difficulty of trans-regional, cross-regional collaboration during the COVID restriction? Anyone from the panel or simply anyone want to respond to that line? Yeah. Okay. Maybe Marco first, and then Katrina.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sure Katrina will say more, so I will be short. I think all I want to stress is, of course, I was saying that regional connections is a choice that are more open now. But I use the word connections instead of collaborations, two different things. But that again open up the whole question, how can we transform these easier regional connections into regional collaborations? Certainly maybe with less frequent face-to-face meeting, but more kind of virtual meetings. I have no idea. I think it's up to us what to imagine the possibilities of virtual collaborations. But for one thing, as I showed in my slides, we get connected more easily with other people in the other parts of the world doing the same thing or similar things or showing the same interest, and so are interested in sharing. You know, in the past, we would not be thinking about it. We would always think about, hey, wow, we need to invite him to Jakarta, or we need to be invited to Mumbai. Wow, we don't have the budget. Wow, blah, blah, blah. No, we don't even think about it. We just, send email. And I think people are so excited to get invitation. And I think Katrina said, I remember she was saying that, wow, I'm so happy to meet you all here because we have been so much at home lately. So yeah, I think that's just a comment just to open up things, but I don't know how to really develop it. Katrina, please.
It sort of tie back to the question of this shift from the funding to bonding situation, funding to bonding. And
I think there is, if I may, I think somebody said about we need to change the word residency to fellowship. I think it's Ong Keng Sen, actually. Ong Keng Sen said, we should stop thinking about residency. We should think about fellowship, looking at the process rather than at being residing at a place and connecting in physical sense, but we can connect in a kind of process. So fellowship instead of residency. That's another keywords that I think we can kind of, start from.
Katrina, I saw your transregional symbol behind you, so why don't you start?
I think that collaboration is totally possible. I think we already have, after over a year of doing this, and having met So many people. I don't think I've ever met this many people from Asia in real life than I have virtually the past year. And I don't think that my friendships with my Asian friends have been strengthened the way it has been strengthened the past year. And I think that that kind of friendship and solidarity has been strengthened precisely by the sense of how much we have in common. Whether it's the precarity of the cultural worker and the artist, the difficulty of doing our work, the anxiety, the stress, but also in relation to just the governments that we have. The similarities are astounding. And I feel like the sooner we can put it in one place where we can all tell our stories, the sooner we will also realize that collaborative work is totally possible. We can only start that when we have a very clear sense of what's happening in the region. And there's no real place where we can see that. We're all quite dependent on global media outlets at this point to understand exactly what's happening. And I feel like that's not really the ideal situation. So I think that there is a major step that needs to be made in relation to actually starting the collaborative part of this solidarity. And it really is agreeing on the information that we believe about the nations and the places that we are part of.
I think there's a next question also for Katrina. Probably you will have to follow up just right away. Thank you. I think this is a question from Professor Shin Nakagawa. Professor Shin asked, "Dear Katrina, thank you for your excellent presentation. I have a small question. You used the term, quote, translocal project in your presentation. I think the concept of translocalism is important in forming solidarity. What do you mean by this term? It would be great if you could explain a little bit more." Yeah, okay, you continue.
Sure, absolutely. I'm actually taking from, I don't want to be theoretical, but I took from Arif Derlich's theory on translocalism, which champions, instead of championing civilizations and nations, champions the place and how the place is created by experience. And I feel like this is a more productive, intimate, grounded way of building solidarity. Because one of the things that I realized was keeping me really from doing the work that I wanted to do when the lockdown happened was how limited I was by the fact that I was in Metro Manila, the capital. So whatever my experience was really born of my access to what was accessible to me in the capital and then my privilege, right? So I wanted, and I couldn't understand why I needed to be apologetic for it. And so I decided to be very upfront about the fact that whatever experience I talk about is mine, is within this particular place, and it does not invalidate or question the experience of others in other regions, in other provinces. And I feel like in the course of the year, I've also found that it applies to the narratives that we've heard from other countries in Asia. In a critical part of that realization was a closed workshop on art and democracy in December. And the realization that even as we talked about, at least in my sessions, we were talking about climates of fear, that even within particular countries, the climates of fear would be very different in different areas. That sometimes the climate of fear comes not from the national government, but from the local government. Sometimes it doesn't even come from the government officials. It comes from those who are powerful in the cultural sector. And so I realized that more and more the idea of place, of grounding in that particular place, in the translocal narrative, is something that we can actually champion towards telling the complex stories of our countries. Because also, this is why I also focus on the idea of storytelling. The moment you have someone else telling our stories for us, they will handpick what is the most interesting story to them. Right? They will pick the story that will trend on social media. They will pick the story that will get the most readers for whatever global media entity they are part of. But we have the capacity to not care about that kind of algorithm. because we are telling our stories. And so in the process as well, if this is a project that ever happens, we are changing the algorithm because that voice will be ours. It won't be a voice from outside of our translocal locations and our translocal narratives.
Thank you, Katrina. I think this is also in part speak to kind of experience shared by Nabu and Rina's, this direction of, instead of thinking this isolation, confinement, and singularity as a kind of something entirely negative, if we go even more local, then it's the possibility of going beyond the locale become even more possible or thinkable. So I think this is dynamic between the locale, the local, the site, and that confinement could be reversed in certain thinking. I think this is a really nice conversation. And anyone else want to jump onto this discussion? I think we have some 10 minutes before we close the Q&A. I think while you guys are thinking, I want to read another comment from Sokhong Yong. Left a message before leaving this session due to another meeting is in waiting. Oh, okay. The presentation and speakers are fabulous. 3 exclamation mark. I love their sharing and conversation. Well, thank you. And Jeffrey Tan to everyone. Thank you so much. So sorry, I also need to leave. Okay, stay safe. Okay, any other question and comments coming out from our audience? I think I can open up anyone in the Zoom. I think we have 84 participants in the Zoom, in the space. Anyone from the Zoom, feel free to turn up your video or unmute yourself and just ask question to, or just comment or share what you thought about this several lines of discussion. All right. Professor Shin again, how can I see Rina's film more? Rina, where do we access your film?
I can send you a link.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I can list a bunch of places where you can see them, and maybe maybe the organization can put it out. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay, great. Thank you. Next question, Kathy, to everyone. In the panelists' opinions, what is the greatest barrier to intra-Asian collaboration and connection? Long-term, not incidental, or one-offs. Okay, I guess you can see the question. I think this is directly toward any of the panelists can answer this question. What is the greatest barrier to intra or intra-Asian collaboration and connection? I think this is opens up a lot of things.
Very quickly, funding.
Who is speaking?
Katrina. Very
Katrina,
quickly,
okay.
just funding. I think funding and language.
Funding and language.
Because also, even if we decide to do something like a project that's across Asia in English, then we also will be, it would be right for us to also do everything in translation, right? So that already quadruples the budget that you need. So you have a basic problem with funding, and then you will want to do it well, which means you're translating to at least 4 other languages.
Right, I think this is very spot on. Language, money.
I want to say one barrier, which is but also true, I think, which is the principle of non-intervention among Southeast Asian countries. Because this is a major barrier that we cannot talk about Myanmar and, vice versa. And okay, that's it.
Politics.
I think the Southeast Asian countries need to get rid of that kind of Asian failures of not intervening to each other. We need to intervene as long as it is multilateral, not single, kind of one-to-one. But if we move as together, we need to intervene to each other, because we should not be burying ourselves only on political issues, because what is hidden behind this political agenda are mostly very, very human problems. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Rina, did you raise your hand? We have 9 minutes. Rina?
I want to say something about funding. I think, first of all, we don't really have the framework or the mindset that intra-Asian content makes money. For example, I had a script and I wanted to find funding for it. I wanted to shoot half in the Philippines and half in Taiwan. And immediately somebody told me that's not going to make money. Forget about it. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why we don't have enough resources for it. Another thing is we do have public funding in Taiwan, but it's very short-termed. Almost every public funding in Taiwan that I can use to do this tells me you need to finish it by the end of the year. And then you have to give me like a report of what you did. But sometimes these kinds of cultural ideas, we need time to brew it. We need like 5-year, a 10-year plan to brew it. But a lot of the fundings are very short-termed, very short-sighted, result-oriented, KPI-oriented. How many people attended? How many people participated? Or how many people do you have in a picture? So I think, yeah, that's one of the two of the funding-related issues that I think we have in Taiwan that are kind of a hindrance towards this intra-Asian collaboration or intra-Asian content. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So next question, sorry, I have to be quick here. Hi, Lawrence, thank you for the eloquent moderation. May I ask where I can read more about the concept of co-appearance? Short answer, Hannah Arendt's book, The Human Condition. There's a chapter about co-appearance and action as a social space. Okay, I'll move on to next. Thank you for the question. Kathy said it's an ASEAN agenda, not a Southeast Asian one. I think this is a comment, not a question. Then Patayak Jitaran, sorry, 550. To everyone, I have tried to connect people across nation before. It was a Japanese conversation session for my Thai friends who are studying in Japanese. The problem was that I sensed that it's hard for them to connect. For example, finding topics to talk about. Do you have any suggestion to enhance the connection between people meeting online? All right, quick question for everyone. Quick tips about making connection across, again, barriers, linguistic, culturally, I think, and finding talk. Rina? Okay.
Yeah, quick response to that. I also find that as a problem when I want to make Southeast Asian related content in Taiwanese ground. How would people care or relate to the films or the characters that I have in my film? Mutual grounds. You get dumped, you get heartbroken, you want to eat, you like food. You know, those things that we have in all of us, in all of our lives, that we can relate to, because sometimes even though our cultures are very different, we do have a lot of things in common that we can all feel and talk about.
All right, thank you. Quickly, Wilson Young, is Wilson Young here? Hi, may I ask a question? Where are you?
Yes, I'm here, yes. Oh, thank you, yes. I would like to ask two questions. Actually, I would like to ask one first question is about the language boundary, because some audience asked the question is about how we're working with the cross-cultural peoples. So do you have any advice or tips for working with different language people? And the other question is about maybe for Michael. And actually, I would like to know more about what you're talking about connection and collaboration, the relationship between both of them. And how do you think about to transform the collaboration and connection together?
All right, I think this is an open question. Anyone want to jump on this?
Thank you.
Yes. Naval?
Yeah, just a short response for the translations or the language boundaries. Yeah, I think it's a very important issue. As Katrina also mentioned about it, I think the main matter is time. Yeah, we need time for translations, and we need time for listening to the people who speak in the different language, but the normal work friends we are more work with is this kind of times for consuming the problem or the boundaries between the translations and the ingredients and the different language. Yeah, it's just my response for it.
All right. If there are, sorry, I see something. State funding, you're right, Kathy. State funding function in the same way everywhere, constrained by yearly budget and the need to demonstrate impact. May see to everyone, this is a fascinating discussion. I feel like it cuts to the question, what makes Southeast Asia, Southeast Asia? What holds us together? It isn't really language as so many have pointed out. Maybe finding the answer to this question can help articulate why Southeast Asia. I think this is both a question and a comment, rhetorically.
So I think that with Southeast Asia people, I think they're connected with various culture from the Cambodia, the Khmer in the past, and with the mainland China from the past. I think that these things all travel around the peninsula of Asia, and so it kind of like forms like a common quality for the Southeast Asian people. And that's my opinion.
Thank you, Patajek. Sorry. Yeah. Any comment on this bigger rhetorical question at the end about Katrina?
Yes. I think now more than ever, the unities that we want to find is easy because we're all going through a pandemic. And I think that common experience is really something that we can work from. I have the benefit of having friends who live across Asia and Southeast Asia. And so I know that while the experiences are different, we're all also, our worries are the same. We're worried about our parents. We're worried about our earnings. We're worried about getting vaccines. You know, we're worried about governments silencing us because we're critical about what's happening. And I think on that basic level of the pandemic, our capacity at empathy has really been on overdrive the past year. And it's really a starting point, I think. And this is why I work with such hope about the possibility for solidarity exercises and participative, collaborative solidarity projects at this point across the region. But the other thing also is that the pandemic surfaced many issues that are, it surfaced many issues that we are all facing as nations. And it's not just repressive governments, it's not just the violence and the silencing and the censorship and the militarization of our leaderships. I think it's also a relationship with the bigger Asian countries. It's also a relationship, it's a geopolitical relationship with the world. And I think that we are at a point where that's becoming more clear now, that for many of us in Asia, we are actually all bound together by the kind of relationship that we have with the rest of the world and the powers from beyond Asia. And so I think that that's really, this is why this is a good starting point. It's a good meeting point to be talking about this and to be thinking about going beyond our translocal narratives towards a bigger one.
Okay, I'll just keep reading. Just to say from Meishi again, I feel so deeply connected to Southeast Asia. I grew up across Singapore and northern Thailand, but I have been struggling to articulate why. So it isn't just a rhetorical, sorry, yeah, that was my fault. Yeah, there was not, it's a theoretical, conceptual question, that's what I'm saying. I appreciate the connection is real, as Katrina is pointed to as our colonial history and our relationships to empire. Thank you. Yeah, and apologize for the quick use of the choice of the word. It is indeed not a rhetorical question, but also a question that is deeply rooted in this sheer, well, whether you want to turn it as a legacy of colonial or history of colonialism, of Cold War, of contemporary globalization and capitalism, which tie into the current bigger power struggle between the bigger powers that's still going on. And okay, I think, thank you so much. I think this is already a demonstration of what a meeting point would look like in the future in the following 2 days. And I want to take my chance as a moderator to thank our co-organizers, the Mekong Cultural Hub and Taiwan-Asia Exchange Foundation for making these meeting points and the 2-day curated conference possible. I'm really grateful and thank the organizers for inviting me and inviting the 4 wonderful, really amazing speakers in this first opening roundtable. And I also thank all the participants that are still with us in the Zoom.